Hi, let's go back again 200 years, and now we're going to do the coroner's case against William Corder from this old book. I'll just show you the book where we're coming from, The Coroner and the Public Press. The picture above is of Corder putting Maria Marten in a shallow grave, and below it is the arrest of Corder, where he was arrested in a previous video of ours. The coroner and the public press. When the jury had been sworn in order to the further prosecution of their inquiries, there were from 12 to 15 reporters present who had been sent from London, Bury, that's Bury St Edmunds, Ipswich, Chelmsford and Colchester, which Mr. Wayman, the coroner, observing, stated with great urbanity and politeness that he could not, consistently with his duty, allow notes of the proceedings to be taken for publication. The learned gentleman, in support of this mode of procedure, cited the case of the King versus Flint, which went to show that it had been pronounced an offence to publish the proceedings for an inquest before the trial of the party accused, and, in allusion to the case of John Thurtle, he observed that one of the judges had censured a coroner for allowing it. As the present was only a primary inquiry, friendly as he was to the liberty of the press, he had a paramount duty to perform, and therefore would issue his mandate that no notes be taken for the purpose of publication. Mr. T.J. Wooler, who attended specifically for one of the London journals, addressed the coroner at considerable length on behalf of himself and the gentlemen connected with the public press. He admitted that, in a case cited by the learned coroner, Lord Tennyson, the Chief Justice of the King's Bench, had ruled that the coroner had clothed with supreme power in the court where he presided, to prevent that which himself and others requested as a boon, but did not demand it as a right. At all events, the decision of his lordship did not extend to the exclusion of the public. He, Mr. Wooler, would therefore put it to the candour of the coroner, whether it would not be better to permit notes of the proceedings to be taken, so that a correct report might go forth to the world, which could not be expected to be the case if memory only was to be relied on. So there's this idea about the freedom of the press, and then the coroner said it might injure the future trial, because this was only a coroner's trial. Mr. Wayman said he did not feel disposed to argue the expediency of the case in question. It was enough for him that it was the law, and nothing could absolve him from a departure from that, and for acting in opposition to the decisions of the high law courts. Whatever might be his private opinion, his duty was to act judiciously. A reporter connected with the London press said that he had been 15 years in the habit of attending upon similar inquiries, and this was the first time he had been prohibited from performing his duty. The coroner, however, remained determined. Every reporter put his book into his pocket, and here the conversation ended and the investigation was resumed. The following are the names of the coroner's jury. Mr. Robert Green of Polstead, foreman. William Brown, upholstered farmer. Richard Postern, upholstered farmer. Joseph Boswell, upholstered farmer. George Payne, upholstered grocer. Thomas Wilson of Stoke, tailor. Isaac Jackson of Stoke, farmer. Nutton Guymer of Stoke, schoolmaster. James Mortimer of Stoke, carpenter. Nutton Ayres of Boxted, farrier. Thomas Foster of Boxted, miller. James Cook of Boxted, innkeeper. John Cook of Boxford, smith. As you can see, they're all male, and they're all of the middling sort of occupation. So no farm labourers or anything like that. It's just the farmers and people of education. Mr. John Ballum examined. I am Constable of Polstead and have been for some time. During the month of May last, or at any other time, I never told William Corder that I had a warrant in my possession for the apprehension of Maria Marten for giving birth to illegitimate children. At this period of the proceedings, Mr. Humphreys, the solicitor from London, entered the room, and on behalf of the prisoner, William Corder, applied to the coroner to allow his client to be present to hear the evidence which might be adduced against him, so that, with the assistance of his legal adviser, he might be enabled to put such questions to the witnesses as might tend to exculpate him from the crime with which he stood charged. Mr. Humphreys proceeded to urge that it would be impossible for his client to meet so serious an accusation unless he went into the court with something like a knowledge of the evidence which had been given against him at the coroner's inquest. In a case of felony, an accused person, by the statute of Philip and Mary, had a right to hear the examination of witnesses before the justices previous to the trial. The coroner, who listened attentively to what had been said, requested Mr. Humphreys to cite a case from the law books to show that a person accused of murder had a right to be present at the inquest on the body of the party murdered. Mr. Humphreys then referred to the coroner to the case of Richard Patch, who was at the inquest held on the body of Mr. Bligh of Rotherhithe, but notwithstanding which, Patch was afterwards convicted and executed for the murder. Mr. Wayman replied that in the case of Patch was an analogous to this, inasmuch as at the time the inquest took place he was not in custody, nor, for aught that appeared, even suspected of being the murderer. Mr. Humphreys then adverted to the case of Weir, but after a desultory conversation he acquiesced to the proposition made by the coroner, namely, that all the depositions should be read in the presence of the prisoner. The examination of witnesses was then resumed. George Martin examined. I am brother to the deceased on my father's side. I was 10 years old on the day my sister went away. In the afternoon of that day, I saw Corder go to the Red Barn across 2 fields with a pickaxe on his shoulder. He was going in the direction of his own home. I was only 20 rods from him, and I saw his face very plainly. Phoebe Stowes examined. I live in the nearest cottage to Red Barn. On the day in last year, before the dinner things were cleared away, William Corder came to my house and asked me if I could lend him a spade of my husband's. I replied that I had an old one which was good but for little. He said anything will do for what he wanted it for. I fetched the spade, and when he came back, the prisoner asked me how I did. I answered, very weak and low. Corder said, I am in a hurry. Anyway, cannot stop to speak to you. I did not observe any confusion in his manner. I do not know when this took place. I was confined on the 29th of April and went to church that day 4 weeks, and it happened in the interval. I do not remember when the spade was returned. Francis Stowes examined. I am the husband of the last witness. I did not miss the spade. I assisted last harvest in filling the bay in the barn where the body was found. William Corder came in soon after we began and superintended in laying the second and part of the first loads. Corder said in a joking way, Frank, there's a constable coming for you. I answered, I do not care for any constable. One day, when we were at dinner, or bever, i.e. luncheon, in Thursley Lay, Corder came up to me and said, I'll give you £1 note to cut my throat. Towns and Foreman asked him how he could run on so. He was laughing when he said it. James Lee, examined. I am a police officer. In consequence of an application at Lambeth Street office by the Constable Ayres, I afterwards apprehended William Corder at the boarding school called Grove House, situate in Ealing Lane, Brentford. When I went to the house, Corder came out of a room to me in the hall. I told him I had come on some business I had with him, and he asked me into the drawing room. I then told him that it was a serious charge I had against him, and he must consider himself a prisoner. He replied, "Very well." I then told him that it was respecting a young woman named Maria Marten, with whom he formerly kept company in Suffolk, and who, having been missing a length of time, great suspicion existed respecting her. The prisoner said, "I never knew any such person, even by name." I told him to recollect himself, while I repeated the inquiry twice over, and I said, "Did you ever know a young woman by that name?" He replied, "No, I never did." I then told him I would put no more questions on that point. I took the prisoner to the Red Lion public house at Brentford, and left him in the custody of Ayres, and then returned to search the house where the prisoner lived. In a desk which I unlocked with a key taken from the prisoner, I found a passport for France, dated December the 20th, and 4 letters, all of which I produce. In the dressing room, I found a black velvet reticule containing a pair of detonating pistols, maker's name Harcourt, Ipswich, a flask with powder and bullets, and a bullet mould. The prisoner told me they had brought them when he was 10 years old. The coroner observed that the detonating principle was a much more recent invention. On the way to the Red Lion, I told him the body of Maria Marten had been found. He made no reply at first, but when he had got about 20 yards, he asked me when it was found. Maria Marten, the stepmother, was called in, and on the reticule being showed to her, she burst into tears and said, "Oh, this is my daughter's. This was poor Maria's. I saw her put it into her bag on the day she went away." On that day, I heard no words between Corder and Maria of an angry nature, but she was very low. When Corder told her that the constable had got a warrant against her, she cried very much. I have often heard them dispute about a £5 note, and Maria used to say to him, "You have taken away the bread which belongs to me and my child." On one occasion, when they were so quarrelling, I heard Corder say, "Pray, Maria, don't tell me of that note any more. You shall have a shilling as long as I have one, and your child too." I heard my daughter say to him, "If I go to prison, you shall too." She often said this once about a week before she went away with him. William Towns, the foreman of the prisoner's mother, examined. Last harvest, picture's gone again. There we go. Last harvest, the prisoner ordered the bay in the Red Barn to be filled with wheat. I think the fodder or litter had remained there since the year before. The bay was cleared of corn last year before Stokes Fair, which begins on the 16th of May. William Corder managed the farm after his brother's death. Maria Marten, having been to examine the clothes, said, "I know the handkerchief to be the same as my daughter's had on the day she left, and the bonnet was that taken by Corder in the bag. The pieces of shift I know to be my daughter's work. I know the shoes by their being tipped at the heel. I saw my daughter put an ashen busk into her stays on the night before she went away." Lucy Ballum, examined. In the week after last Stoke Fair, I cleaned William Corder's room when a lid of his box fell off by accident. I saw a pair of kids' gloves and a pair of boots on high shoes of Denmark satin, clashed with leather in it. Mr. Robert Orford examined. I am a cutler and live at Hadley. About this time last year, or a little before, William Corder came to my shop with a small sword, with a scimitar blade, about 12 inches long. It had an ivory handle and was mounted with brass. He wished it to be ground and to be made as sharp as a carving knife. He said he had a cousin going to be married, and that he would sit at the head of the table to carve with it. I did as I was directed, and he called for it the same evening and paid for it. I'll leave it there. We'll carry on with the coroner's report in the next video. I hope you're finding this of interest. It shows you the type of evidence and the courts that were used even 200 years ago to find the evidence and whether that Maria had been murdered or not. Thank you for watching, and give us a thumbs up and whatever, and I'll see you at the next one. Thank you. Bye.